We are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms.
The president announces bigotry and intolerance, but acts of anti-Semitism are on the rise. What can be done to stop it?
It's a judge who was courageous enough not to be intimidated by the President of the United States.
Free to go. A Miami-Dade judge rules the county may not hold inmates for immigration, but it is not over yet.
We're not picking winners and losers. We're picking winners. And the winners are the people who get a job in our state.
The governor is in a nasty fight with the Speaker of the Florida House, and the legislature convenes on Tuesday. We'll take that to the roundtable.
Good morning. A big news week and a lot to cover in the next hour. We begin with a rise in hate crime, real or perceived, around the country, including South Florida.
This week, the FBI arrested a St. Louis man for just some of the scores of bomb threats to Jewish community centers, schools, and advocacy groups like the ADL. Juan Thompson reportedly made 8 threatening calls to JCCs, including one in which the FBI says he warned of, quote, a Jewish Newtown. Frightening. In South Florida, there have been multiple phone threats to JCCs, prompting evacuations and a lot of anxiety. So far, nobody has been caught. Additionally, there's been a spate of anti-Semitic vandalism, including swastikas painted on walls and etched into cars in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood on Miami Beach. So let's talk about these disturbing incidents with our guests.
Introductions first. Yael Hirschfield is the regional director in Florida for the Anti-Defamation League. Brenda Moxley is Director of Community Security for the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. She was formerly Assistant Special Agent in charge with the FBI's Miami office. Wayne Black is a veteran South Florida investigator and security and threat assessment expert, and his clients do include Jewish schools and organizations as well. Good morning, and thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Great to have you all come in. Brenda, Greater Miami Jewish Federation, I know it well. I know its leadership. In fact, I took a trip to Israel with Federation a number of years ago. Its security has always been high, very tight. Is it higher now?
Well, I can tell you that a few years ago, the Federation saw a need, not just the Miami-Dade County Federation, but across the nation, to have one entity to serve as a clearinghouse for all things related to safety and security. So they created the position, the Office of Community Security, right, which is where I am.
Right, and you had been, in your career, a special agent with the FBI and the assistant SAC in Miami, is that right?
That's correct.
All right.
You know, I think we need to acknowledge that in the news, these bomb threats and hate crimes across the country. Yael, is this a real ramp up or a perceived ramp up? What are the actual numbers in hate crimes?
We're still gathering from ADL's perspective our audit of anti-Semitic incidents, but anecdotally I can tell you that there is an increase of anti-Semitic incidents not only in Florida but across the nation. Just this year, if you think of compared to last year's audit, and we're still about to release those numbers, in 2 months we've seen an increase of anti-Semitic reporting. Now, whether they're real numbers that are driving the reporting or the people are perceiving the threats and relating those numbers and incidents to us because they're more knowledgeable as to who to report to, we're still not sure. But we've seen it in schools, we've seen it in neighborhoods, cars, vandalisms, the swastika, the hate symbol that touches the Jewish community so profoundly is appearing everywhere.
Yeah.
So,
Wayne Black, on Monday, one of the bomb threat calls was made to the David Posnack JCC in Davie, and I've got to say those pictures were very sobering, seeing small children walking out calmly but quickly, hand in hand from that terrific center in Davie. When you saw those pictures, what did you say? What do you as a security expert think?
It really worries me, and I'm looking around the country, and probably 5 or 10% of the schools are evacuating, and I think that's a huge mistake for a non-specific bomb threat. Remember Berlin, Nice. I think it's target selection.
You mentioned Berlin and Nice, the trucks that
yes,
ran over
absolutely.
people.
Mm-hmm. Remember, schools are hurricane shelters, and I can prove with blast physics that kids are safer in the school, unless there's a device. unless you find a device in the school. Of course you would, but I would keep the kids in the school, and most are. The Jewish schools in South Florida that are protected by Israeli security professionals, where the schools listen to the professionals, never evacuate.
Brenda, has there, in your experience, ever been a bomb following a bomb threat, ever?
Not that I know of. I mean, here locally, is certainly not.
People who want to hurt and maim and kill don't give advance warning. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And so these bomb threats are a specific terror device, not so much a physical threat, but a psychological effect?
Yeah, of course. It's meant to cause disruption and fear and intimidation.
Yeah. Why, Yale, why? Why now? Why? Is it, what, a disintegration of civility? Is it the year of ugly campaigning? What is it about now that is, we're seeing this rise in hate?
I think you touched on it very well, Glenn. It's an incivility that's happening across our society. ADL put a report about attacks on journalists, and we found over 2 million tweets containing anti-Semitic speech. We are looking and seeing an increase of incivility in the way we talk to one another, in the way that children in schools are treating one another, and it translates all over the world. So we are in our own bubble reflecting what's going on out there, which is an increase of hate being expressed in many different forms.
Yael, would you, I watched a news conference Friday by ADL leaders in New York, and they did not tie it directly to Steve Bannon or the Trump White House, but they pointed out that Steve Bannon, who the senior advisor, headed Breitbart News, that a lot of alt-right, ultra-nationalist, white supremacist read the Breitbart News, and that Bannon, is a kind of a polarizing figure when it comes to race and bigotry. I mean, would you agree?
I think when Breitbart allowed people that for years ADL had been able to push to the extremes of society, to marginalize, when extreme views and bigotry and prejudice were in the corner of our societies, and then they were brought into mainstream, we're allowing everyone else to say, well, this is okay. That's what ADL teaches. We need to call bigotry and prejudice statements wherever we see it and push them back to the margins of our society. And when that happens, we'll see, at least in our own communities, less expressions of hate. It might be different than what we're talking in terms of bomb threats. You know, there's other categories or factors to account for. But in the day-to-day expressions, in how we treat each other, in the vandalisms that we're seeing, whether it's cars on neighborhoods or synagogues being spray painted with graffiti, that's what we're seeing, is the extreme coming into the mainstream and expressing itself.
You know, Tuesday in the president's first speech to Congress, do we have, I want to go off track a little bit, do we have the president's sound from Tuesday night about discrimination? Okay, we're going to play that in a minute, but it was really interesting that the president opened this monumental speech with the world watching with something that was not in the script just a day before. Listen.
We may be a nation divided on policies. We are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms.
Well, that was the strongest denunciation the president has yet made of bigotry and intolerance. He didn't actually use the word anti-Semitism, but in an earlier news conference, he had said, "I'm the least anti-Semitic person you will ever meet." Brenda, if I can go back to something that Wayne said a minute ago, he would advocate, recommend that these schools not evacuate when there is a phone threat. What would you tell schools?
Well, one of the things that I would say is one size doesn't fit all, but I think that we always have to use logic and common sense and have a good plan in place. This is one of the things that with the Federation, the Office of Community Security, we spend time working with the community, providing training and education out there so that everyone can be best prepared to handle something. So really one size doesn't fit all and taking everything into consideration.
So evacuate on a case-by-case basis, or what are you saying?
I'm saying that if institutions are trained appropriately and have a good plan, that they'd be best prepared if there were some type of emergency, whether that be to evacuate or not to evacuate, because sometimes, again, one size doesn't fit all.
You know, I know Wayne does a lot of consulting and advising on local law enforcement, and we're going to get into that in a couple of minutes when we come right back. Stay with us.
Welcome back live in our studio on this Sunday morning. We are talking about the rise in anti-Semitism. I said at the outset, Wayne and Brenda, and yeah, I'll get you in here in a minute, that a man in St. Louis, 31-year-old man named Juan Thompson, was arrested. I find it pretty remarkable because, and good police work, because he had used a machine to mask his voice, used phones which you could not trace the number. Wayne, this is, I mean, for the FBI to have caught this guy, not saying whether he's guilty or not, we don't know yet. But, I mean, this is hard.
Well, they did a great job. He finally used his own phone, I think, and got carried away and made it personal. He's not the guy we think is a copycat or just somebody else's doing. He's not the guy we think that's making all these hundreds of bomb threats. But look, just from a security operational point of view, every week in South Florida, I look at videos of probes, people trying to get into Jewish schools. I watched one last week that was not in New York, a video on Friday of a lady dressed up in Arab garb that said she was a school teacher and tried to get into a Jewish school. And the great people at security stopped her. So that's happening on a regular basis. There are two kinds of private Jewish schools in South Florida, those who have had probes and those who don't know they're having probes. And from our point of view, there are two issues. One, we have a normalcy bias. That is, we want things to be great. And from the government side, we have a normalcy bias and a failure of imagination. We never imagined 9/11. We never imagined Berlin. We didn't imagine Pearl Harbor, the Cole. So we don't think like the bad guys do. And I think these bomb threats are target workups.
When you say
target
you
workups,
target workups.
Towards what? What do you mean by that?
I think they're going to watch and see. We know from other indictments, a current indictment in Dade County of an ISIS guy that was going to go after a Jewish center. We know that they do surveillance, they do evaluation, they do just what we do. They work up the target. So
are these lone wolves, or is this organized, a group? I mean, what do you think?
I think it's organized. ISIS attack in the United States, ISIS guy in Key West, Orlando, Pamela Geller's ISIS attack in Garland, Texas. It's absolutely ISIS. The guy claimed a recent indictment in Dade County, Medina, claimed allegiance to ISIS. So they're known wolves, I think, Michael. Not lone wolves. 80% of these are known wolves.
But those people, according to the court records, are self-professed ISIS. They're, as far as I know from reporting, and maybe you know more, there is no ISIS connection in reality. There is nobody in ISIS has reached out to these people. These were self-professed ISIS.
Well, let's talk about Orlando. ISIS lady, recruiter, stirred the guy up, the boyfriend up to do all those things.
The Pulse nightclub shooting?
Yes, sir. Garland, Texas, Somalian who was trained on probation for lying to the FBI about training in Somalia, the guys that went after Pamela Geller.
So relate this to hate crimes. How does this ISIS sort of targeting Western civilization relate to current local Jewish hate crimes? And hate crimes against, there have been a couple of fires at mosques, anti-Semitic.
In Tampa, a mosque was burned.
And those kind of hate crimes.
And most of the fires in the mosque, all the ones that I know of, are set by one of their own people. The last bomb threat at a mosque was done by a member of that mosque. So that's something to consider too. I don't know if it relates directly.
Yeah, at least the ones in Florida that we know of were not set up by people of the same faith or people from within the community. The Fort Pierce Mosque was set up by a person of the Jewish faith, unfortunately. So I don't know where those stats are coming or that information, but I think that when a Jewish institution or a Muslim institution is targeted with hate, we need to confront it and call it what it is. Those are hate crimes.
And if I can add to that, I think it's so important that we do that outreach. And we talked about the Jewish community in Miami-Dade County, and there are over 120 Jewish institutions there. But it's also outreach to the multi-faith community. Mm-hmm. Just last week, we worked with Department of Homeland Security, and we held a training workshop that was an active shooter workshop that was open to, and we had a great attendance from law enforcement, first responders, and leaders from the multi-faith community.
So Brenda, from your perch now working for Jewish institutions, yet being so involved in law enforcement, what can law enforcement or politicians do to further what you do? For instance, the hate crime bill that's in 45 states. I think Florida is one of them. Okay. Things like, what is missing? What's the next step?
Well, Glenna, that is a great question. We work closely and collaborate with law enforcement at a local, state, and federal level. And in fact, have built those partnerships and all have been extremely supportive. And we attended the roundtable that the Congresswoman held last week to
Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Correct. And it is a conversation, but it's more than a conversation because it's implementing tangible plans for the community with the support of law enforcement, which they've been great, and it has been so helpful.
I would like to add that hate crime statutes allow us to build enhancement into the penalty and it sends a stronger message to those who want to harm specific communities based on who they are. That as a society we will not tolerate it and we will increase the penalty based on that. Just a few weeks ago, a man was arrested trying to bomb a synagogue or do a Dylan Roof kind of massacre at a synagogue in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. South Carolina doesn't have a hate crime statute on
They're
there.
one of the 5
They're one
states
of the 5
that don't.
So, the state itself cannot avail themselves of that tool to send a stronger message. The federal government will need to come in and do that. Yeah. So we would like all other states to be on board so that we as a nation can send a message that hate crimes will not be tolerated and that we will send stronger messages to those who want to commit those kinds of crimes.
And if I can just add one last thing, on April 23rd, there's going to be an interfaith gathering at the Holocaust Memorial on Miami Beach, and we're hoping that will be supported, in the thousands by the multi-faith community.
Those kind of interfaith gatherings and things like UMC, the MCCJ event last night, Miami Council of Christians and Jews
and Muslims
and everyone else. Those are the kind of things that are just sort of priceless to advance this conversation.
They are important. And so was this discussion. Thank you all for coming in. Great to see you.
Thanks for having us.
As always. All right, a major ruling reversing Miami-Dade County's decision to hold undocumented inmates at the request of the federal government. After the break, we're going to sit down with the attorney at the center of that decision.
A major ruling this week by a Miami judge reversed Miami-Dade County's decision to hold undocumented inmates at immigration agents' request.
Judge Milton Hirsch ruled that it is unconstitutional for the county to delay releasing inmates who are eligible to get out. Attorney Philip Reisenstein represented the defendant in that case, James LaCroix, a native of Haiti who was accused, pled guilty to habitual driving offenses, but he was held in the county jail for ICE, which wants to deport him. Mr. Reisenstein, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so if you would, in lay terms, describe what Judge Hirsch, who I've known for a long time, brilliant, contrarian guy, it was a gutsy ruling. What did he say?
Yes, great decision by a real judge, not a so-called judge. Courageous, but facts on the law, simple and correct. And really, this isn't a complicated case. When you boil it all down, what Judge Hirsch said was, we don't hold people in this country in jail for no reason. And that's exactly what happened here.
So what his ruling, it looked like his ruling cited, well, the 10th Amendment, separating states' powers from federal powers. But my question, and I don't want to get into legalese or anything, but isn't that sort of a civil question? And Judge Hirsch and the court hearing was a criminal proceeding. So one of the county's points was this is supposed to be a civil case for federal court. isn't that where this decision should have been made?
I won't make it legalese. It's real simple again. I have a client who was in a criminal court in jail on a criminal case. And we had a criminal court judge who said, release him. And that's why we were able to bring this action in criminal court. And it should be clear here, we're not talking about the power of the government to deport or remove somebody. We're talking about whether Miami-Dade County is going to buckle under the threats of this president and hold someone in jail just because some federal bureaucrat signs a piece of paper and says, please help us out.
We are looking at pictures of Mr. LaCroix, who is a native of Haiti, who has a long record of driving with a suspended license or no license at all. And as I read, the Miami Herald reported that these, in fact, were felony offenses. I mean, this guy, and he pled guilty. I mean, you have to wonder, doesn't the federal government have a right to deport him if they think that he is a felon?
Sure. First of all, this was a driving offense. It was a license offense. Second of all, he was
here. But he had several of them.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. So do many other people. If I recall correctly, the former Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, had 2 DUIs and the President had 1.
But he was a citizen.
That's correct. This gentleman was here legally, and he was driving without a license. And again, this isn't an issue about the power of the federal government to deport him or remove him. Even though he was here as legally as a refugee from Haiti, this is about the federal government saying, hold someone in jail when there's no more reason to hold him while we decide what we want to do.
Can we just go back to something you said before?
Sure.
The reason, and for anyone who's really not following this issue, the reason initially Mayor Carlos Jimenez and eventually the whole county commission decided to honor these detainer requests was because of President Trump's threat, if you're a sanctuary city or even a whiff of a sanctuary city, we're going to withhold federal dollars. And that's what you and the court called capitulation, to honor these ICE detention requests. So are you saying that the county should go ahead and release and possibly have federal dollars withheld and then take that to court? Would that be a way around it?
You know, first of all, sanctuary cities is just a term that they made up in the president's executive order. There's no such legal definition of that, although I think, as Judge Hirsch would say, and many would agree, the United States of America is a sanctuary country. But so here's what we have, though. We have the president issuing an executive order on the 25th of January, and the next day the mayor, seeing the threats in there to withhold funding, buckling under and saying, I'm ordering the jail to keep people in jail. Now understand what the federal law is. The actual federal law says you have to cooperate with the federal government and give information. The executive order says hold them while we figure out what we want to do. Big difference.
But then there's if I could just follow up on that,
Sure.
the county commission then ratified or passed that
On
resolution
a vote of 9 to 3.
And so this is now a county local law. Does the county not have the jurisdiction to make its own laws and decide to honor those?
Well, everybody has to follow the Constitution of the United States. Shame on the county commission, shame on the mayor, because what they're saying is we're going to give in to blackmail, we're going to hold people in jail without probable cause. This is why it's a simple issue here.
In a sense, part of the irony of this case this past week, was that Mr. LaCroix was already snatched out of the jail by the time you had the hearing before Judge Hirsch, and then he ruled on Friday of this week. Where is Mr. LaCroix right now?
He's probably on his way being deported back to Haiti, and shame on the federal government for not letting this play out and not honoring the courts of the states of Florida. They have a habit of doing this.
Will the ruling of Judge Hirsch, is it binding on all the judges in the 11th Judicial Circuit, Miami-Dade County, or anywhere else?
It's not binding because we came in front of him on one defendant on one case. But what this gives is a roadmap. I've been contacted by lawyers across the country. Show us Judge Hirsch's order. Show us the motion that you filed. So lawyers now across the country, and especially in Miami-Dade County, have the ability to go in front of judges and say, here's what they're doing, here's what the law is. From Justice Scalia on down, you know, everyone's favorite conservative who said you can't force states to spend money for federal programs. This is how you do it.
As the attorney for Mr. LaCroix, you don't know why the federal government asked to hold him, do you? Whether there is a federal crime involved, their specific issues. Do you contact them? Do they give you some sort of probable cause?
They file a piece of paper that's not subject to judicial review, and that's the problem here.
So you don't know?
It's just somebody saying, you know, I think we're going to consider removing him from the country. Do us a favor and keep him in jail while we work it out.
It's not a court warrant. A court warrant is required in Broward County, Palm Beach County, for people whom ICE wants who are undocumented, who have either bonded out or served their time.
They're doing it right. When a judge says hold somebody after reviewing something, much different circumstances.
So the county has filed a notice of an appeal.
Right.
And the appeal will be based on, as I understand it, the fact that there was this 9-3 vote by the commission, and that it is a home rule county, and it is a law. I mean, what do you expect to happen in the appeals court in the third district?
I always walk into court wanting to win. I'm going to walk into the 3rd District wanting to win as well. I have to see what the county writes, and then we're going to respond. I can tell you that groups like the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center have offered to assist us. I've taken them up on that. When they file their brief, we'll meet them in court, and we'll continue to argue for the Constitution, because that's what this is, a simple decision of Constitution, Bill of Rights, individual rights. We don't hold people in jail for no reason. That's all this is about.
Well, we will be in whatever court it appears in, state, federal, appeals court. But Philip Reisenstein, thanks for coming in. Thanks for discussing it.
Thank you for having me.
After the
Appreciate
break,
it.
thanks, we have a lot to talk about. You know where on today's Powerhouse Roundtable. Stay with us.
All right, it is time for some informed opinion and good analysis of the week's top news stories with our Powerhouse Roundtable.
We have a great one today, and so some introductions. Marlon Hill is a Miami attorney with the Hamilton, Miller, and Berthasell firm, and also a past president of the Caribbean Bar Association. Jessica Fernandez is the president of Miami Young Republicans. In fact, she was a delegate at last year's GOP convention. And Sergio Bustos is senior editor for Politico Florida. Before that, you may remember, he covered state politics for the Associated Press and the Miami Herald. Welcome.
Great to have you all come in.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
My friend Marlon, last night you were one of the sponsors of the Miami Coalition Christians, Jews, Muslims annual humanitarian dinner. And what was talked about certainly was this alarming rise in anti-Semitism that we have seen in our community across the country. What do you think accounts for it?
Well, I don't know. I think we're in a very surreal political environment right now, and hopefully there's not a nexus to it. But certainly as a country and as citizens, everyone should be concerned where there's hate anywhere, really, in any community, whether it's against Muslims or Jews or Christians themselves as well. So I really believe that this is something that we need to pay very close attention to in terms of how we conduct our own selves in our daily interactions and engagement with each other. We have to push back.
There is no doubt that the atmosphere and the tone of everything for the past year has been nasty, nastier. It was so interesting Tuesday night, Jessica, when the president opened his speech with, we are a country divided but united against discrimination. It really was the first time he came forward to say that on a grand scale after taking a lot of heat for not. Do you think that was appropriate?
I think that the president did a great job, highlighting how we're not going to put up with acts of hate. We're not going to put up with anti-Semitism. We're not going to put up with, religion targeting of people. It's not acceptable part of our society to allow these things to happen. And we see it. We need to call it out and try to squash it as quickly as possible.
You think he's been? I think a lot of people think that prior to that, the president was not coming forward and calling it out. You agree?
Well, I think we saw him finally say the things that he needed to say to bring the country together. I think a lot of people, on both sides of the aisle thought that was a very unifying speech. We've had a couple little tweets in between then, but I think that the speech was really great and kind of outlining his vision for the country and for his administration. And I think it was a crucial moment to take that opportunity to call out hate.
Were you up on the Twitter storm this morning? Were you up early watching the president's tweets?
Well, yesterday kept track of them. I think there were 6 of them in all.
And today was a couple more?
A couple more. I haven't been able to catch up with all of them. But just following up on that point last week, at Politico, we think that Ivanka Trump may have had some influence in maybe giving her father some tips and a little bit of guidance on talking about this whole anti-Semitism kind of emergence in the country.
And I wish he would listen to her a little bit more too. You know, I think he's becoming the news rather than making the news, right? And going into his 6th week as the president, he really can spend more time focusing on issues, on setting the tone, driving the message, as opposed to being the message.
Yeah, well, I think Ivanka apparently was a huge influence on paid family leave.
Absolutely.
I think that is her. I think you can attribute that directly to her.
No, and I think, you know, one of the most compelling things about Trump, and I think, you know, why he got so much attention initially, was because he was able to kind of bring these like traditionally Democrat issues and kind of make them part of, you know, part of the Republican umbrella. I mean, family is very important, and we need to support, you know, young families being able to have paid leave. So that was really great to bring attention to that.
You know, all of the good things that the president hoped would come out of that speech, the honeymoon for 24 hours, came to sort of a screeching halt this weekend with some tweets about accusations that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. I mean, that's causing a huge uproar now, mostly because there's no evidence that he's provided. Can there even be evidence of that legally that the public can see?
I don't think so. I mean, it just seems like if it's happening, I know that this morning there was a call on Congress from the White House to get Congress to investigate. But at Politico, we reported Friday, and it's pretty interesting, that this may be a way that Trump is trying to steer the attention away from all the investigations on the Russia investigation of the campaign.
General Sessions.
There was a report that on Friday, and other media did report it, that there was an intense meeting with Trump where they were supposed to talk about the rollout of policy next week, which includes immigration refugees,
ban,
and the whole thing. But that he really spent a lot of time in the meeting venting angrily at Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, for deciding to recuse himself from any Russian investigation.
Right.
And Trump felt that by doing so, he was almost saying he was guilty of something.
But isn't on face value, isn't that an appropriate thing to do? Whatever role or not Jeff Sessions may have played, isn't that an appropriate thing to do in light of the questions?
Well, listen, you know, I think he exacerbated the whole message and the issue in the first place by tweeting about it. You know, he needs to have more self-discipline. Rather than being a distractor or deflector in chief, he needs to be a commander in chief. And his speech before Congress was an attempt to move in that direction. And then
it was conciliatory.
Then he brought it back.
The tone, but then it came back. If we can, I want to put up on the screen for you at home, if you by chance have not seen it, one of the tweets that the president sent out, one of the 6 weeks that he sent out early Saturday morning. Okay, it's not ready. I'm just going to read it. He says, "How low has President Obama gone to tap," misspelled, "my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon, Watergate, bad or a sick guy." I mean, my goodness, Sergio, the President of the United States, who only a few weeks ago was praising Barack Obama, calling him a bad or a sick guy. I've never seen anything like this.
No, I've been reporting and writing on politics for 30 years, and I can't really even compare him to someone else, because just when you think the roller coaster is going up, maybe, all of a sudden you go straight down again. And it really is taking away from, I think, that Tuesday speech. I thought there were a number of points in there, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you could agree or disagree on, but at least it was policy related, and it wasn't this kind of, I don't know, he wakes up angry. It's like, does he need to have coffee in the morning?
He didn't vilify the news media, among other things, which if he wanted to do it was okay. But, you know, Jessica, as a matter of fact, well, let me just get you on the record. When you saw that Twitter storm yesterday and read those, what did you think?
Look, I mean, I think it's something worth investigating. I think it kind of falls under this Russia investigation. You know, I think it is a matter of national interest to know whether a sitting president wiretapped a candidate or a president-elect.
Sure,
I mean, we don't have any evidence per se, but I think he's calling on Congress. I believe he's calling on Congress to investigate the matter, and I think that would be a very devastating thing to find out if indeed it did happen.
Why not just say that? Why not just say that?
But wait, there was no. Why did he say that? What happened to
because at the end of the day,
that
too, it's that old adage too. If I tell you, you know, did you beat your wife? You know, and I say that in a Twitter storm to 35 million followers, you know, whether or not you did it or not, And whether or not there's any evidence of it, it doesn't matter.
Just say domestic violence is a real concern for our society and should not be tolerated. And the fact that this incident could have happened needs to be investigated and properly squashed.
Well, his first tweet said, just saw information that the phone said, that we had been wiretapped at Trump Tower. I mean, there wasn't any if about it. I mean, it was presented as a fact.
Saw information
of something,
on a news report.
Well, there had been a report, and then a guy, a radio commentator who's not entirely credible.
And the process for getting a wiretap, Michael, as you know, is very complicated.
Well, Michael, here's the problem I see too.
Hold your thoughts, Sergio. I'm told we got to take a break. We'll be back with more of the roundtable in just a minute. Welcome back. We are in the midst of a typically robust roundtable here with some great guests, and we want to point out this morning the first announced candidate for governor of Florida as a Democrat is the mayor of Tallahassee. He is from South Florida, and he was back in Miami today at the 93rd Street Community Church. His name is Andrew Gillum, a rising star in the Democratic Party. Let's listen to what Mr. Gillum had to say.
Florida is a very close state. We lost. Democrats lost by about 1 point this last cycle. Barack Obama won in 2012 by 1 point. He won in 2008 by 2.5 points. And the last 4 Democrats who ran for governor all lost the state by about 1 point. So we're an extremely close state electorally. And I believe that a Democratic candidate who has a vision for this state that includes all the diversity of folks who make this state happen has the best shot at winning in 2018 November.
And you can only be first out of the gate once, and Andrew Gillum is it. Marlon, you say that you know him. No doubt down here trying to get an early start, getting his name out because he is not widely known around the state.
Shining star, product of Richmond Heights in South Miami-Dade County, and he's now the mayor of Tallahassee. Very progressive family, has married, twins, one on the way. I think he has a kind of temperament and disposition. All the candidates for governor democratically have come out of the middle of the state, out of Tampa. Maybe it's time to do something different.
Sergio, he did stumble a bit coming out of the gate, however, because he put some campaign-related materials on his City of Tallahassee email account or server. He said, I'm sorry, and he corrected the error, but not exactly the smoothest rollout.
No, that's exactly what we used in our headline was stumble, because it's not the way you want to launch a gubernatorial campaign to make the announcement to donors up in New York, I think he was at, and then to turn around a few hours later and apologizing for something that obviously is going to be used in a campaign video against him.
Yeah. Boy, emails, tweets, it gets people in trouble.
Well, if you're going to stumble, might as well stumble early and get it out of the way.
Yeah. True.
Jessica, on Thursday, you were at a meeting out at La Carreta restaurant in Hialeah. I covered that appearance by Governor Rick Scott, and a lot of people in the tourism industry and also people supporting Enterprise Florida. There's this huge feud now between the governor and Florida House Speaker Richard Corcoran. How's this going to play out?
So full disclosure, I do represent the Greater Miami and the Beaches Hotel Association, which is advocating to keep Visit Florida. I mean, I think there's a battle going on right now of ideologies. Even within the party, you have the governor who wants to keep incentives because these are tools that we have in our toolbox to be able to attract businesses, to let people know that we are open for business. And you have, these very ideological representatives who are trying to pick a fight and kind of, make their name. So I think in the coming weeks, we got to see, how these bills play out in committee. The House side, it looks like we're moving towards a much reduced Visit Florida. I mean, Visit Florida.
The governor wants $78 million for Visit Florida. Richard Corcoran, Sergio, wants maybe, I don't know, 25 million, something like that.
Yeah, it's just because there's it's a Republican brother against Republican brother fight here. With Governor Scott saying, and a very simple question, what role does government play in offering incentives for business to relocate or even expand in Florida? Right. Scott says there is a role. Corcoran says there's not.
He says it's corporate welfare.
Exactly.
Well, and then there is this experience just very recent with this whole Pitbull Visit Florida expenditure and questionable to those watching, especially to Corcoran. Is it an appropriate expenditure of money? Have the funds been overseen properly? And so there is a question not only of philosophy and whether it's corporate welfare, but in practice.
Well, I guess that's the key question, is the value for the tax dollar, right? And the return back to the taxpayers. I mean, this is the #1 industry for the state of Florida. Orlando, Disney, Mickey, okay, you remember that? We need to really evaluate, the industry that creates so many jobs for Floridians, right? What percentage of our budget should go towards promoting that to ensure that visitors continue to come to the state of Florida, including Hialeah, by the way.
And these are not just jobs, these are careers. I mean, tourism is a career-oriented field that we have here. I mean, think about all the hotel rooms. We have over 55,000 hotel rooms in our member association. We have the cruise industry. We have the restaurants. When the production companies come here, they rent hotels, they rent a number of caterers.
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, have to interrupt you. We are out of time, but tourism is #1 industry in Florida and #1 in South Florida. So thank you, and thank you all for coming in.
It's
great to have
you.
Thank you.
All right, still to come, my personal perspective, and then we'll have one last look at the weather forecast.
Happy Sunday, South Florida. We are looking at some breezy to gusty conditions out there. Taking a look outside of our beach camp in Hollywood, definitely seeing those dangerous marine conditions with a high risk of currents along Atlantic beaches. Winds sustained up to 25 miles per hour. Some areas are even gusting as high as 30 miles per hour. So a gusty day is in store for us. Definitely not the best day to be out in the water. Highs later this afternoon will be a few degrees below average. We're talking mid-70s, but it's the windy to gusty conditions that are going to stick around with a mix of sun and clouds into the afternoon hours.
Erica, thanks. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about stealing from the government. That is, stealing from you and me, taxpayers, happened again in South Florida in a huge case of Medicare fraud. The U.S. Attorney charged 2 women, 61-year-old Mildred Gonzalez of Miami and 40-year-old Milka Alfaro, also of Miami, with running a number of bogus home health care companies that scam Medicare for, sit down for this, $20 million. That's right, $20 million. The Medicare Fraud Strike Force says these 2 women ran 7 home health care companies in Miami that recruited real patients. Undoubtedly, they got paid to enroll. And then the companies billed Medicare for services that were not needed and usually were not delivered. A classic Medicare scam. We're #1 at this stuff. Now, here's my question. How were these crooks able to get away with $20 million before they were caught? What does it take to send up a red flag at Medicare accounting? Wouldn't you say that maybe $500,000 in questionable charges would be enough to stop payments? How did these people get away with $20 million? If a kid from the hood goes into a convenience store with a Saturday night special, steals $100, that's news, mainly because there will be videotape and the crime will have been caught on camera. TV news loves that. But these Medicare fraudsters are almost never caught on camera, and they face a judge in federal court where cameras are not allowed. What a shame. One other thing, why are so many of our Medicare scammers so often Cuban and recently arrived Cubans? I believe it's because they had to game the system in Cuba to survive, and when they got here, hey, a free and open society, gaming the system, a breeze. Well, shame on us. Let's make it harder to game our system. Let's do a better job of teaching immigrants that in America, you can make a good living honestly. We should also make it harder to get a license as a provider of Medicare services and toughen up the scrutiny of those Medicare bills. The 2 women in question have already pled guilty. They will be sentenced in May. The judge should give them the maximum sentence possible, and once they have served it, these 2 should be deported. They are the kind of immigrants we really don't want. That is my perspective for this week. Hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And if you're out on Carnival of the Mile today in Coral Gables, come visit us. We'll be there. We also want to hear from you about anything you like in the news. Here are some of the addresses where you can find us. And there are more. You know where those are. Have a great Sunday. Thanks for being with us.